Hello, everyone. Welcome to JoyPac's webinar. Last webinar, we were talking about the game design and the development. So today we are going to talk about testing, game testing. So how to test and when to test a game has been always a very hot topic. So today I'm very happy to have my good friend Christina from Zeptolab and Gabrielle from Clap Clap Games. So Christina, would you like to introduce a bit more about yourself?
Sure. Hi, Vivian. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here on this wonderful topic. My name is Christina. I've been working in Zeptolab for over 6 years. And I'm responsible for the business development in the company.
Thank you. And Gabrielle, would you like to continue to introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Nice to meet you all. I'm Gabriel from Clap Clap Games. We are a hyper-casual game developer. We have been doing hyper-casual games for about 1.5 years now since I founded the company. Since then, we have launched over 100 games to the App Store or 100 different concepts. We have over 10 million downloads. We have published games with Quali, Submarine Jump, and also Snow Patrol with Voodoo. As I said, over 100 prototypes in those 1.5 years since we're active. And we are a team of only 2 people. So in terms of testing, I think we pretty much know what we're talking about.
Cool.
So glad to talk to you.
Yeah, cool. And I'm Vivian from JoyPac. And JoyPac is a hyper-casual mobile publisher. Basically, we've successfully launched a lot of games in the past years in China. And since last summer, we finally also moved to the global market. And we see some good results from our global launching. So here we are going to together talk about how we test a game and how to maximize the performance. So I would like to ask you guys, which approach do you guys take when it comes to testing?
All right, I can start. For us, testing is a very, very refined art. I think certainly the most important thing in the whole process of doing a hyper casual game. And because of that, we try to test as soon as possible using every single tool available, especially Ctr tests, then moving to a CPI and retention test, eventually publishing a game. So basically, as you can see now on my screen, that's the test that we certainly use. We come up with a new idea that's pretty difficult on itself, but when we have an idea, we move into building it so that we can do a CTR test, which is basically just recording a couple of videos on top of a game and running those videos on a Facebook campaign. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. If the game performs well on CTR test, meaning that people are interested in that concept, then we go ahead and build the actual game with a gameplay, publish to the App Store, and go ahead and do a CPI test to validate if the CTR results were actually real, because it's not a precise art, it's science. It's something in the middle. You have an indication that a game is going to perform well, but you never know until you actually do a CPI test and also a retention test to see if people play the game for a very long time. If everything is okay, go ahead and publish the game. If you don't reach those KPIs, you basically kill the concept or iterate if there's any great ideas on how to do that. But basically, the way that we test CTR is 4 to 5 videos. So we record them very easily on top of Unity. You don't have to publish anything, so super fast to see if people are interested in the concept. Test marketability. If it does well, then we go ahead and we do that by testing Facebook link click campaigns in US, iOS for about four days with $50 a day. Although different publishers will test the game in different ways, that's usually the most common type of testing that we have seen lately. If the game gets like 4% and higher CTR, usually that's the indication to build the game. Although also different publishers have different KPIs that they look for, some higher, some or lower. Depends a lot on the publisher in itself, and also the type of campaigns that they are using, because link click campaigns versus app install campaigns pointing to a different game, they are going to yield different results and have different KPIs. So basically that's the process that we use. If it does well there, then we go ahead and build the actual game.
Okay. So how about talking about the different publisher might have a different approach. So how about you guys in Zeptolab, Christina?
Yeah. That's a very interesting question and topic because for us, that's actually like the testing. This is something that has recently changed. We optimized it a lot. So to dive a little bit more to the history, I hope everyone can see my screen now.
Yeah, we can see it.
Cool. Yeah, so to dive a little bit in the history, like back then Zeptolab was like launching games that wasn't like constant launch. So we've been working a lot on heavy games, like with deep narrative, with heavy meta, with like games which actually been like we consider as hit games. So those games were rare, but those games were like big. Of course, that led us to the fact that we've been launching games like very, very like rare. So one game sometimes came out per 2 years, sometimes per 3 years, and of course, like this is not the strategy we've been like satisfied with. So a while ago, like to be more precise, last year, May of last year, we optimized the strategy a lot. So we understood that this is not our approach anymore. So instead of doing like those big games once per 2 years, we actually need to start launching the games regularly and optimize a lot our approach to the testing. So we inducted a new process. We called it, like internally, we called it a search lab and a green lab. I'll tell the difference like going forward. But the main thing here is that actually the strategy changed from focusing a lot on hit games to start launching the games more regularly. From focusing on the games with heavy meta, we started to focus a lot on vital meta, and basically like the first step in our approach is the marketing validation, the marketing test. So basically before we start working on the game and the prototype, we actually need to run and verify the marketing potential of the early product. So we start with the marketing test where we run the video on Facebook and we basically verify the CTR. If we have a solid enough prototype, the next round will be to verify the CPI. We have benchmarks are pretty much similar to what we call the market standards. So for the step one, for CTR, we have basically everything that above 2.5% we consider as good enough indicator, and we start working with this prototype further. For the CPI, our goal is to have less than 30 cents. And as I mentioned, we use Facebook to run both of the tests. So for the step, if those benchmarks basically are passed, so this is what shows us that the concept itself, the idea itself, has good potential. And basically then we start working on the early version of the build. So we can basically start testing the early retention of the game and verify the CTR and CPI again. Basically, after the second step, we are working on the full game to do the proper soft launch, where we can also check up the retentions, early retention, usually D1, D3, D7, and if we have enough content, D14. And then straight to the global launch. The whole scheme we called is 1 to 3, so basically 1 month. So we have marketing test, then we have 1 month to prepare the first version. Then we have 2 months to do the soft launch, and from soft launch to the global launch, we have 3 months or more months. So in total, within the 6-7 months, we aim to do the global launch of the game. So from the concept to the global, around 6 months.
Yeah, so I understand from everyone, basically for JoyPac and the Clap Clap games, so we are all more like a more hyper casual games. So our benchmark is pretty much the same. And I understand from a little bit casual games from Zeptolab, we have a little bit differences there. But when you're facing a very low CTR test, then obviously we all sort of give up and move on to the next one. But when there's a very nice low CPI, for example, like a 10 cents, and then when you see the day one retention is not that impressive, what do you do? And where is this trigger point that you say that I will continue the game and to kill the game, basically?
So for us, it's very easy. We do it on first step. So marketing test, that's basically the step where we verify the potential. So if the product doesn't reach the CTR 2.5% and CPI is above 30 cents, then we kill the project. So we don't push it further. Just start with another concept. We start working and optimizing and actually thinking whether we have to kill or improve the project on later stages, basically on soft launch, during the soft launch.
How about you, Gabriel?
I think similar. Test as soon as possible in our case, and our testing process it's a bit faster, and launch process a bit faster. Most of the games that we launched so far were launched in under a month from the very first test. But I think the decision to kill a game, it depends a lot on each of the phases. If it is a CTR test, didn't reach the goal, a specific goal of each publisher, we kill the concept. If in the CPI test it didn't reach, like, it depends also on the publisher in our case, but let's say 20 cent CPI, if it doesn't get there, we kill the concept or iterate to see if we can bring it down. But usually it depends on how far it is from the actual goal. And same with retention. If it isn't like 40-something% day one and 12-13% day seven, usually it's also means kill or iterate depending on how far it is again, but kind of similar.
Yeah, we are also pretty much same, but sometimes you have like a very critical, how do you say, testing result. For example, you see, of course, you see like a CTR above 5%, for example, and then you continue to run the CPI test, and you see the CPI is a little bit high, like 1.7 US dollar, for example, and the retention day one is 48. And the day 7 is 11. So how would you do that? And what other element what other point are you going to look at it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean that's a complicated situation in itself, because CPI at $1.7, it's usually too high. But but if you have a CTR which is around 5%, which you said, over 5%,
it's
it
a
means
real
that
case.
people are interested in the game. It's just something else that's causing the game to have such a high CPI. On the retention side, it's good, no problem there. It's actually 48%. It's a really good retention. But the
agree.
CPI at $1.7, if you just look at $1.7, you will say, no, that's impossible. It's too high. But if you dive down in like CTR at 5%, that's good. So maybe what else could be impacting the game at that stage or impacting the CPI? What are the other factors apart from the CTR who could be impacting the CPI for being too high? One thing that you need to look at is store conversion. It's actually quite common for a game to have a very low store conversion. A lot of people are gagging to the App Store, but when they get there, something in the App Store disencourages them to download the game. It could be like the screenshots are not good enough. It could be like the description or just the style of everything. What they see in the screenshots is too different from what they saw in the video where they clicked, in the actual UA video that they saw on their Facebook feed or something like that. It's too different, so that they feel that it's different from what they were looking for. It could also be that the game or the other factor that could impact that, it's also the CPM, cost per impression in Facebook, for example. It usually comes from like the quality of the content that you show, also the audience that Facebook optimizes to show your content to. It could be like something with very high competition, like people who a lot of other advertisers are trying to advertise to. So it depends a lot. What could impact on CPM. That's the most complicated one because you don't really have a lot of impact there. But again, it's just to show that, you know, a $1.7 CPI, it's not always impossibly high. There could be other factors that you need to look at in order to verify and investigate if there's something there that could be fixed.
Cool. So talking about using Facebook as a testing tool, so are there any other platform are you guys using?
So for us, if we're talking about the early tests, we use only
Sure.
Facebook at the moment, just because I mean Facebook has all the needed settings there, so we can easily optimize as we need. So for early stages, only Facebook at the moment.
Okay.
Yes, and it is the same for us. I think Facebook is the standard across the whole industry. It's the only one that allows you to compare the numbers that you get. Like, for example, if you get for one game 50 cents CPI and for the other one 30 cents CPI, you have a direct comparison there. While if you go with a different ad network, it's usually like the connection, it's not that clear, and you don't really know if you're getting a lower or higher CPI because of the network, which is different, or because of the actual game. So I think it's the same for us and probably the same for most people in the industry, unless, of course, like you guys are testing in China, Facebook not very effective. So you need to try it a different way.
Yeah, indeed. For global testing, we are also using Facebook as the main network, and in China, we are using Mintro and a couple of other networks. So, indeed, talking about testing and settings are something, you know, which is very tricky. And a lot of the audience here are also asking us, how do you set your campaign and how's your setting look like in the campaign?
Yeah, so our idea actually when it comes to the setting on Facebook is actually we don't want to narrow the audience, right? So we use as wide as possible. We typically if to be more precise, we test it on Facebook in US, since this is the biggest and most representative market. So we test it in US, and in terms of the people, we don't actually in more precise targeting, we don't use any gender, age, language. We don't do that. We just keep it very strict to the interest. So those are people like in a gaming industry, which involves with games, apps, like maybe advertising, and that's it. So we don't optimize on other stuff like age and language, because we think that there is also auto optimization in Facebook, and we think that they can do that much better than any of our predictions. So we keep it as wide as possible and stick it just to Facebook, US, iOS, gaming.
Okay, and also during the campaign, you don't really trying to optimize or narrow down since it's maybe leaning to one side.
So no, for early tests, no. For early tests is wide as possible. So we have the setting. Of course, sometimes we can do that again if we see some tricky, tricky numbers first. Yeah. So we can try to do that, of course. But if we speak about the generic, we just keep this setting on default.
Sure. And so a lot of people are also talking about creatives. I'm sure that we all have a lot of experiences making creatives. So can you share some tips with our audience and also a lot of developers over there?
Sure. Creatives is basically the whole point about hyper casual games. It's if your game doesn't generate good creatives, it's probably not going to work in the hyper casual market. So the first thing we think about when you're thinking about the game is that game going to be attractive? Is going to generate a good 15 seconds video? Can we make so that the first 5 seconds of that video are very, very interesting to grab people's attention? That's basically the whole thing, and one of the most important things in the whole process of making a hyper casual game. And especially in Ctr tests, that's exactly what you're doing. If you're doing a Ctr test, you're not making a game, you're making creatives. And in our case, for the early tests, we tried always to make the creatives as clean as possible. No additional text on the top, can you beat this level, or no one ever won in this game, that sort of stuff. We don't do anything like that. We try to avoid having hands in the screen, that sort of stuff. Make it very clean, so if the core mechanic in itself is not enough to attract people's attention, it's not going to be a hand or a text on the top that's going to save that game. So we try as much as possible to make it very clean for the early tests, and then whenever the game is already proven, then you go ahead and try to make mom versus dad, those variations, to see if having all of those things together, you can push CPI a little bit down, but it's not going to, there's no mom versus dad that saves a game that doesn't have a good enough performance.
Okay, sure. So basically, when you start a testing a game prototype, and what kind of daily budget are you using, basically? Christina, how about you guys?
Yeah, so basically, when we do there are several steps, right? And as everyone was mentioning, we do the Ctr and Cpi test. So for Ctr test, we usually spend around 300 USD, not more, very rare more. So around 300 USD, and that's for one day. So we do the test, we run the test for one day with a small budget. So for Cpi, it's a little bit varied, right? So if we have basically the early prototype, right? So we can do the real CPI test. And in this case, we don't need a bigger budget. We can use like 50 USD, maybe 100 USD, and that will be already needed to run the test. But if we don't have, and we only have like a video and some creatives, then we do the test through split metrics with the fake store page. In this case, we spent a little bit more, also around 200-300 USD to make to gain reliable data, but not more. So I think that's enough from outside.
How about you guys, Gabrielle, in Clap Clap? Can you hear us, Gabrielle? I think he has a little bit lagging here.
Yes, seems so.
Okay.
I'm back now.
Oh, he's back. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So yeah, how about you guys regarding to the testing budget, the daily budget, basically?
It's actually similar, I think, to what they do in Zeptolab, but again, in our case, it depends a lot on the publisher that we're working with. But usually, again, it's $50 a day for 4 days. So the total is a bit lower, but a little more spread out for Ctr tests. And also, I think most publishers, that's what they use as well for Cpi Test to validate. So I think you get quite enough downloads and impressions that way. So it's a good way to validate. And then, of course, if the game gets a good CPI and it passes those early tests, then usually there's a higher push for like a marketability test to see if the game can actually scale and is going to maintain a decent level of CPI and retention as well. And if it does well, then onto publishing. And then sky's the limit as long as you have a good game there.
Sure. And I see some of our audience are asking here the question. So would you be able to like share some examples of your test creatives, and also how did you actually basically change, and how do you actually show creatives? Is it really like a gameplay video, or is it like a totally different user acquisition video, you know? So because they often see like advertising which is not really relevant to the actual game. So how do you, what's your approach, and how do you guys do it?
Well, I can certainly show something around the creatives. This, for example, those are creatives, 2 games that we tested on CTR. As you can see, they are very, very simple. But those were 2 games that did well in terms of CTR. So it shows that you don't really need a lot in order to have something that grabbed people's attention and can be turned into a game. Those 2 ended up not being published due to various factors, but they were games that did well on the CTR site. That's basically the video that we were showing people and that were grabbing their attention, generating a good CTR, eventually a good CPI as well, and bringing them into a game. So basically, you know, that's what we use for CTR. The one on the left is ended up being Bubble Wrap, which is one of our games. The one on the right ended up being Conveyor Belt, which is also one of our games. Super simple concepts, but very easy to understand. Like the one on the left, just popping Bubble Wrap. The one on the right, it's the usual Conveyor Belt in the airport where you try to merge the different bags. So we're controlling that. You know, easy concepts to understand. The actual video is also super simple. So that's basically how we do it, and the type of creatives that we use.
Cool. And how about you guys, Christina?
Yeah, so for us, we also we actually try to do the video. They are very focused on gameplay. So when we run the first test, the Ctr test, we keep it very strict. So we do the gameplay, the MVP of the product, and what we found out is actually that the simpler the video, the better the results there. So we try we try to keep it very straightforward, so people can understand the gameplay very easily. We keep it simple, easy, and very readable. And what we also notice is that you don't really need to over polish the creative. The creatives, so the good quality is enough, but don't do like this over polishing, because current trends that they actually show that doesn't really affect, or sometimes it even has negative effect when you over polish your creatives. And
Yeah.
you mentioned as well, we also try to avoid small parts like the text and small and very unreadable parts within the gameplay. So it should be like very focused and readable for the player. So this we found works the best so far.
Should be more relevant, right? So you basically acquire the right users, so it's more efficient. Yeah. And so here we also have some user having some questions, which is very interesting as well. So especially for Gabriel. So do you have some rule that when are you going to stop your prototype productions, basically? Yeah,
You mean killing the prototype, or
exactly.
when you're doing the test? Well, killing
Yeah.
the prototype is usually whenever it doesn't reach the KPIs, or at least it's not close, or doesn't have like ideas of iterations that could bring it to the desired KPIs in each one of the phases. So in CTR, if it doesn't get like a good CTR, in CPI, if it doesn't get a good CPI, or if the early retention is not good enough, usually those are indications to kill the prototype and just move on. So, but usually like we do a lot of different tests, and we do a lot of different tests on a day even, and usually like we do a whole batch of tests and check the results. But when we check the results, we usually just move on to another ones. So the decision is, do we go back and turn one of those prototypes into an actual game, or we just move on to other concepts? So that's usually the decision there.
Okay, so from what I understand, you guys are only like two men, right? So making all those games and the prototypes. And I remember once you told me how many prototypes are you making, like per day, per month?
Me and Alan, who works with me, again, two people on the team only, and we can do up to 2 different concepts on a day. Whenever we're really like on focus on the process, because usually we merge that with actually building the games for some of the CTR concepts that did well. But we can do up to 2 different concepts a day, so 14 a week, and who knows how many in a month. It is a lot. But we do have a bunch of processes in order to be able to achieve that. For example, like we have this huge Unity file with a lot of assets and a lot of scripts that basically, let's say we want to do like a 3D runner. We already have a script for the movement. We already have assets ready for like the particles that pop up at the end. We already have assets for the scenario and the characters and the different obstacles that we need to avoid. So whenever an idea pops up, it's basically what else do we have to do in order to make this idea work.
So by doing that, and also the other thing that we do a lot is reusing either mechanics or assets or things like this is an interesting concept. I think we need to try different things on top of that. So we go ahead and build like different concepts on where, let's say you use some sort of physics related object. So we try to add that object to different settings and different gameplays and try to use it in different ways. And by doing that, which is something you like, it's a concept you know is promising, you can try that in different ways and probably or very likely find one of those concepts that works well. But also you were able to do a whole lot more by building on top of something that you already have. So we do those things a lot. And also, I think the major thing is the focus on building only what's necessary for the testing phase where you are. If you're doing CTR, we don't really need to worry about, you know, polishing the movement or the mechanics, or if the things, everything colliding right, or if you die, if you do something, you know, that's not going to be on the video. So we only do what's necessary for the video on the CTR test. If we do like, if we move on to the Cpi test, we only do something that's going to impact on Cpi and on the early retention. So build like, I don't know, 10, 15 levels and then randomize everything later. No meta, you know, don't worry about polishing every single detail that people are not going to worry too much about after the first day. So usually those are the things that we try to focus in order to be able to do, you know, 2 concepts a day. If you're doing the actual game, usually we can do a game in a week or even under a week, the entire game publishing to the App Store and everything. So we are super, super fast for a team of only 2 people. But we do that by focusing on the right things.
So while you are already making those CTR tests, so how do you do the actual CTR test? Because here a lot of people are, although it's not that new, but compared with the CPI, not let's say not everyone is doing the CTR test. So how do you guys run a CTR test exactly? Are there any other special tricky points that you can share with our audience here? Christina.
I mean, it's basically like doing the CTR test. The main thing there is trying to build a concept that generates a video that's going to attract people's attention. So it's a little bit different from doing games. It's not, I think, for the usual game developer, it's certainly a different, how can I say that? It's a different methodology, right? It's a different science because you're not building a game, you're building a video, or you're building something to record a video, and then those videos are going to go and be used for the CTR test. So that's basically the what we do for the CTR. And then it's the usual that we already talked about. Run a campaign on Facebook, couple of days, $50 a day, see if people are clicking on the link, which means that they are attracted to the concept. And if it is in a high enough number, let's say 4 or 5% CTR, then you go ahead and do the game.
Where does your link go? Are you creating a fake Apple Store like app, or are you creating like a kind of website redirected to the website?
So we have done different ways. In the past, the very early test that we did, we used just a random app of ours, like another game, and we were linking to that game. But that usually is not ideal because Facebook sees that people are not actually downloading the game, and then they see the people who are downloading the game and start trying to optimize for those people. But you're not, you don't really need people to download the game. You only need people to click the link. So since then we have switched to link click campaigns. so we don't point to a specific game. And we have in the past pointed to like the App Store or to a page in our website saying game coming soon, sign up here to get notified, something like that, but not specific to another game. So those are different methods, and I know different publishers also have different methods of their own. Some still link to a different app, which is mostly what happens when you are, you get an advertisement on Facebook, you click on it, and then the game that you land on the App Store is just a different game, completely different from what you saw.
Right.
That's what happens there, but I don't think the that method is the best nowadays.
Okay, so how about you guys, Christina, in Zeptolab? How do you actually kick off this Ctr test?
Yeah, so pretty much similar. So first is a very good point that by Ctr test you cannot really make a decision whether people will like your game or like the gameplay. Nothing about that. So you just need to stick to the idea that the Ctr test, the video test, shows how attractive your assets, how attractive your visual is. That's it. No other decisions or like conclusions can be made out of that. So we do it pretty much the same way as we discussed, like Facebook. We use Facebook, and then we run a one-day test. The benchmark 2.5%. Of course, that's not like, I know like many developers have different benchmarks. This is like the lower benchmark, which helps us like to start making the decision of whether to move forward or not. But of course, like if we talk about the best performing concepts, we have over 5%. So 5% is a very good indicator.
I'm curious here because you guys are having your IP, right? So whenever the game using an IP, is that having like a different benchmark for CTR?
Yeah, so regarding the IP, as I mentioned before, we have a search lab which is focused on like doing the concepts, regular concepts, like viral concepts, the game which can be easily scaled and attractive for a really wide audience. In the parallel, we started to do similar thing with our IP, and we call it Green Lab. I'm sorry for the wording, but that's like how we started to distinguish those two. And we've been experimenting like and trying to adopt the same approach, like 1, 2, 3 approach with early market validation and potential of the concept. We started to actually use the same approach for the brand. And I mean, we use pretty much the same benchmarks, like in terms of the CTR and CPI, it's the same, 2.5% and under 30 cents, but because the main goal here actually is to make sure that you can scale your title, your future game, and you can make it successful. But what we see is the positive impact of the IP is actually comes to the basically number of like number of installs and CTR. So the most, if we compare the most successful concepts with IP or without the IP, then we see that the CTR will be higher for the concepts with the IP. But I mean, like, with the IP, it can be higher than 5%. Without the IP, it can be around 5%. So there, I mean, like, both indicators are good. But in the meantime, we see that with the IP, it's a little bit higher. So basically, with the IP, we do lots of initiatives. But one of the results I wanted to show, and you see it here on the screen, is actually the recent game we launched with the partner Kukoi. Which shows actually that the IP has the power. So basically, we've been we managed to first to scale a lot, and we reached the CPI around 10 cents, which we consider very good result. And in terms of the installs, in terms of the how attractive the art materials and the creatives with the IP, like it shows us very high CTR. And in terms of the installs, we got more than 10 million installs in less than 3 months. So basically, that showed us that we are completely right by doing the approach we do with the IP. So using the same benchmarks, but in the meantime, we understand with the IP we can reach much better results. Just because when people see the character they already know, there is like something they already can expect behind the IP they see.
But does this also help for the CPI then in that case?
Well, you know, like the goal here is actually, well, I would say not exactly, because, you know, like there is a real correlation. Like the goal is like to make CPI less than LTV, right? And what influence LTV, it's definitely not the brand, you know. So for LTV, you need to work properly on the game itself, on the monetization in the game, right? So I would say that CPI, no, that was like basically managed by the team. But of course, when you do properly work on the creatives, right, that helps. And then for the creatives, we see that if you like, you know, you can also do good and you can do bad with the creatives. Like, for example, from our experience, when we used like some icons, screenshots, video with the IP, but it was not really clear what IP is doing there, right? Or the IP was not presented in a proper way, then the CTR was quite bad, right? But when we properly using the IP, like with like when Omnom, like you see here on the screenshot, right? It's like nothing else on the background. There is just Omnom, clear and big, and he's running. So that's actually the best working icon we have so far. It's super clear, it's super readable, and the IP is big, and people can actually understand that it's Omnom. So in this case, yes, it works great. But in the meantime, you know, you can do creatives which will not work, even though there will be an IP. So yes and no. It all depends on the execution.
Yeah, but having said about the CPI, have you also see, like, for example, CPI changes based on the market dynamics?
Yeah, you mean like if you compare, like, for example, Western market, like US and other markets, or?
Yeah, for example, in the US market, how do you see the differences? Do you see any changes, and do you actually see CPI goes more expensive when there is like a special moment, like a special time period?
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course, it always varies. I mean, like, but I mean, we have the whole team monitoring and applying the best practices to make sure, like, we achieve and we are able to do the CPI according to the benchmark. Like, to be frankly, we everywhere, despite like the market, we use the global networks, you know, like Unity, Facebook, Iron Source, and even like when we go, because we buy traffic globally, right? So it's not only US, we actually have other markets, like China was one of the biggest market, like after US. So we noticed that the global networks, the one I mentioned, they're pretty reliable. So we are able to achieve the goal over and over.
Do you normally see the huge gap or huge differences between like China and the Western market in terms of game testing?
When we use global networks, no. But when we use Chinese networks, then yes. And we honestly, we don't have the answer to that. So we, as you know, we've been running the test. We don't know. We really don't know, because we keep using, we localize, when we do the test, we localize the creatives. We use the same creatives, you know, like which work in global market. We use the same, like the best performing ones. We use the same targeting, but somehow the results can be unexpected, you know. Global network, I mean, like, usually local networks, they should work better, right? Because you can kind of buy a local audience, but like we still don't have the answer for that. Sometimes there is like very big difference and you don't know what caused that. Maybe the player profile, maybe there are some things, you know, they used to, because in Western we are trying to be focused to make this very simple and readable and, you know, like easy to get. In Asia, for example, sometimes we see that the creatives which are performing best, sometimes you can even don't understand like what's there in the creative. Like there are lots of text, there are lots of like misleading things which you don't even know how it's connected, but somehow it performs. So I think it's just like maybe the localization and culturalization of your materials. It makes it's like very important thing. So that's the thing we need to improve in future for sure.
How about Gabrielle? Do you also have any experience regarding to different geo and finding a huge gap and the differences and the cultural differences, like in terms of the game testing?
A little bit, although that's usually more on the publisher side. We don't have a lot of visibility into what goes on once the game goes into global launch. That's usually like the publisher who takes care of creatives and audiences and running campaigns in different ad networks. So we don't have a lot of visibility there. But yeah, we know and we are aware, we got informed of what happens, like certain markets are going really well, other markets not so are not doing as well as, you know, US, that sort of stuff. Or we've seen games of ours who did really well in certain markets, didn't do as well in others, and usually close markets or ones that are comparable. So, but usually again, that's on the publisher side. Once the game goes into global launch, the developer doesn't get as much visibility or doesn't need to, because the work of the developer is making a good game and not worrying about, you know, the campaigns and performance in different geos.
Yeah, same here. Actually, we've been also trying. Obviously, JoyPac has been, you know, testing and publishing both China market and also the global market. Sometimes we do see the different creatives works like different result, and also for the cost is also coming out like different result, even for the game retentions, you know. But the main core, I feel it's like more like it's about your game, you know. So I feel like if a game is attractive and having like a great game mechanics that attracts and keep users engaging in the game, that's definitely the core, and everywhere shares the same within gaming users, you know. So yeah. So let me see. We only have like another 4 minutes to wrap it up, and I'm trying to answer some other questions from. Okay. So here's a question. So from a user. So basically, where and how do you come up with good hyper casual game ideas? So this is more for Gabrielle, I think.
I think that's the $1 million question there. Coming up with ideas, it's really difficult. It's by far the most difficult part of the whole process, because, you know, there are just so many games that already did so many other things, and it's really hard for you to be able to diverge from what's already there in the market. But there are, a couple of ways to think about. You can either, iterate on top of something that's already there. So let's say a 3D runner. How can you make a 3D runner into a different thing? What new elements can you bring into the game that people are going to think about it as something innovative, which is super important in hyper casual, like looking at it and seeing like, well, that's something I've never seen before, or something that, it's a new take on something I've seen in the past, but it looks different enough that I'm attracted to it again. So yeah, and coming up with ideas, we try all sorts of different things, like looking at day to day and seeing, what regular tasks could you turn into a game, like popping bubble wrap, for example, like we did in bubble wrap, or merging the bags in a conveyor belt in the airport that we turn into a game. But it could also be like, what other elements of a game, or a game that did well in the past, could we make it into a hyper casual game, or taking a specific mechanic of a game and turning that into hyper casual. Anyways, there's no precise answer for coming up with ideas. Whenever someone has like the definitive process, please let us know. That's the most difficult thing. But we try all of those things, and every now and then we hit a hit game. But the thing is, it's important to try and try and try again many times, because eventually you're going to start building upon the different ideas and concepts that you have, and over there things are going to come together and into a successful game.
Yeah, so I hear that basically while you're thinking of a concept, you don't think further about when insert the advertisement, right?
Not really. Although you need to have it clear that the game eventually will have that. So if you know that the concept will never work, or could never have a way to merge advertisement and monetization in it, it's very unlikely to work. But I think there's always a way to make that work. So we try to avoid that, although keeping that in mind for future.
Sounds good. And so basically, I see here our time is running to the end almost. So I see a lot of questions there. And here we will try to answer it using different way, maybe on our social media and so on. And for also specific question to Christina or Gabriel, you can also reach out them personally. So they will be available on LinkedIn. And the same for us, JoyPac. If any developers are interested to talk over and seeking the strategy and so on, I will be very happy to share with you guys personally. And just like you guys mentioned, case by case, of course, there are some established process and so on, but marketing has been changing, as always. So we are also keep running and learning. So I'm very happy if everyone comes to me, and then I will be happy to look at your game and preferably maybe also run a test for you. So we will dig into more details about it. So thank you very much for both Christina and Gabriel. And also thanks all for watching our webinar. And we will be sharing this webinar also on YouTube later on. And also a lot of answer and questions will be also constantly sharing by our LinkedIn, social media, and also on our website. So stay tuned. So thank you very much, and till next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Nice talking to you.
Thank you.